When I was a senior in college, my parents gave me a gift. I went to Greece and Italy on a history department-sponsored trip through the school. It was an amazing experience, and I have many memories. But I think my most important memory was made in Rome, when our tour group was able to visit one of the catacombs just outside the city. Now, I don't know how many of you know what catacombs are. They are underground caves where the early persecuted Christians buried many of their faithful believers in niches in the rock walls. What most impressed me were the walls around the niches. They were filled with drawings of fish and the Greek word for fish, ichthus. These very early Christians created the symbols that designated them as Christians, and it gave me chills to see them. Gathering in these underground places where they also placed their dead, they still didn't allow fear to dominate their lives. I'm going to turn this off so that if the power comes back on, we won't have a problem. I'll try to project. And let's thank God for the piano.
Yes.
Shall we?
The fan is working.
The fan is working. It's the same thing.
This baby's just running down.
Anyway, not create too big a disturbance here. They still did not allow fear to dominate their lives. Every fish sign, every ichthus proclaims that their faith was predominant. Later in the 5th century, in a city called Tagba, on the north shore of Lake Galilee, a church was built to commemorate the feeding of the 5,000 on the site where it supposedly happened. There's a mosaic in the floor that still survives from that period that has a basket with loaves in it, surrounded by 2 fish. You can find the image on the internet. I'm sure that in person it's even more amazing. I wasn't able to see it. It's called the Church of the Multiplication of the Loaves and Fishes. Now you may have guessed that this story we've always called the feeding of the 5,000 is thought of as a Eucharistic or communion story. Jesus takes the food, looks up to heaven, blesses and breaks the loaves, and the disciples give them, along with the fish, to the crowds, and their hunger is satisfied. There are even leftovers. The feeding of the 5,000 is really more like the feeding of the 20,000. The last verse says, "And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children." In a patriarchal society, men were the ones who were counted. One scholar says that the men, women, and children sat separately per tradition, which might explain why it would be easy to count the men. Still doesn't make it easier to hear that people like me and all children, who probably were also running around, weren't counted. But what makes it bearable is that although people like me weren't counted, they were fed. And that, as always, is because Jesus was present. The background of this story is that Jesus, after hearing of John the Baptist's execution, has gone away in a boat to a deserted place to be alone for a while, to grieve and pray. The one who prepared the way for Jesus' own ministry has been killed because Herod, who had imprisoned John, made himself vulnerable by promising his dancer stepdaughter anything her heart desired. He didn't guess that this girl and her mother would then press for John the Baptist's death, proved by bringing his head on a platter. The text says that Herod was grieved, yet his pride demands that he fulfill the terms of his promise. When Jesus hears the devastating news, he grieves also, and most likely contemplates his own impending death as he attempts to find some time alone. But the crowds follow him, and feeling compassion for them, he returns to shore and heals those who are sick. This takes time. When the disciples draw to his attention how late it has become and how far they are from traditional sources of food, they request that he send the crowds away so that they might purchase food in the villages. And then, it's as if Jesus replies, now wait a minute. They may find something elsewhere, but what they need is right here. You give them something to eat, he says. And they scramble. Is that really all we can find? I can imagine them saying. Then reluctantly they offer, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. There's one word used by both the disciples and Jesus that may be the key to this text. That word is the word here. After the disciples have gathered the potential food resources, they say, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus answers, bring them here to me. For the disciples, looking down on what they've been able to scavenge, here looks like very little. From their vantage point, they are focused on the numbers. They see enough food for 5 people or fewer. They are already overwhelmed. Here is a place and a time where they don't want to stay. They have done what Jesus told them to do, but it still seems more reasonable and less exhausting to simply tell the people, go away now and find food for yourselves in the towns. The master is tired, and so are we. Shoot, go away. Jesus has to know what is behind their foot-dragging response, but all he says is, bring them here to me. And in moving their resources from their place, their vantage point to his, amazing things happen. From the immeasurable, scarce resources gleaned from an unlikely source, they are turned into the immeasurable, the abundant, and all eat and are satisfied. Before the bread and fish are brought to Jesus, the disciples focus on these few items of food. Like a member of a family who opens a refrigerator door and focuses on the one remaining piece of cake. It isn't enough for everyone. Never mind that there may be other food in the fridge that is equally good, even other desserts. That person will be focused on the one piece of cake. René Girard illustrates this phenomenon by saying that even in a room with many toys that are exactly the same as the toy in one child's hands, if that child wants that one, another child is sure to want it just as badly. But if the second child would only look around and find one of the toys that is exactly the same, there wouldn't be a fight. And although I rarely comment on politics, it reminds me a bit of what's been going on in the Congress of the United States. We have 2 houses bickering over the contents of the debt ceiling bill. Never mind that one house or one member of Congress may have liked one part of the proposed legislation before. If the other house or someone of the other party proposes it later, well, that changes things. In a performance that would rival any on Dancing with the Stars, suddenly that person or that House of Congress has changed positions. You can almost hear them thinking, even unconsciously, well, now that you want it, and it will make you look good to voters, I want something else that will set me apart and make me more attractive to voters. What they want is not really the same thing, not the same elements of the plan, but the ability to claim uniqueness. We can't all be special in the same way, because here it comes, only one can win. And if in the process the American people and our credit standing in the world lose, well, that's just the way it goes sometimes. Did you know that even our bodies are designed to adapt to conditions of scarcity? That may be a blessing to people in Somalia who are struggling to stay alive in the midst of drought. But to many of us, restricting too many calories makes our bodies think that we're starving and shifts the balance to retaining more weight. The here of the disciples is like the here that is universally human. We feel that we don't have enough. Food, money, possessions, gasoline, even love. But when we move these things to Jesus here, there is a Eucharist. These items are blessed, broken, and shared. There is enough money. Our own bills and the bills of our church or our country can be paid. We have enough food. Other people can also be fed, and we don't need to hoard, and we don't need to worry about weight. As they say in Overeaters Anonymous and other 12-step organizations, we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. The reason 12-step groups are effective is that the program is about reorienting the addict's life and receiving the grace of God through sobriety or abstinence. Turning our will and our lives over to the care of God involves moving our worries, our resources, our grudges, and all of our lives to Jesus here and now, so they can be blessed, broken, and shared. This is almost the opposite of the traditional evangelical approach. Instead of the exhortation to bring your sins to Jesus so that you might be saved, it's instead an exhortation to bring your scarcity and rivalry to Jesus so that you might be reoriented toward the world. It's recognizing that true fulfillment is only possible when others are also filled. It's an invitation to change our focus from what we don't have and how far we have to travel to get it to what is here right now when we bring the elements to Jesus. The Eucharist is for us and for all, gift and grace. Thanks be to God.